I'm Suyemoto, and I am a member of the Impacted Family and Friends Division. I am a diversity trainer and an educator. I am the co-chair of the Greater Boston Regional Suicide Prevention Coalition and the chair of the People of Color Caucus for the Mass Coalition for Suicide Prevention Alliance for Equity. So I took care of my mother growing up who had bipolar disorder, and I helped support my daughter who also has bipolar disorder. And so growing up, I didn't have any idea. I just knew that I had to take care of things. And so I didn't have any idea that I was an impacted family member or what that meant exactly, because no one ever said, do you need help? You must be struggling too. And it's only really since, maybe a few years ago that I had the language impacted family and friends to understand that this was an actual, identity, if you will, and that it had parameters that other people shared. So so maybe, I don't know, how long have I known you? That's, for a while. So, that concept though, of being able to name it allows you to understand the characteristics and understand that you share things across with other impacted family and friends. As a child, I don't think I did very well. I mean, I think I just assumed that, kids think everything's their fault. So I just thought it was my responsibility, my fault. I had to, be a good girl. I had to take care of things. I was the oldest child. And my parents were divorced. So when my mother would have a episode, and sometimes she was psychotic. And so I was just in it. And I think how I dealt with it was, to dissociate and to do what I had to do to survive. And as I got older, I also and took care of my mom. I realized that I didn't have control over her as an adult. She was an adult, I was an adult, and I couldn't do it. I had limited control. And the only places I was talking about this was really to my husband at the time, and also to a therapist. But no one ever really asked, like, well, what do you need, as support? Now, I mean, as I became aware of the role I was taking with my mom in therapy as an adult, it made me think differently about how to help my daughter too. I mean, I think I had a place to talk about it with my therapist, and, I was getting support there, but still didn't have the language to talk about, well, what does it mean, right? I mean, to be impacted, a family member. And so, but I did use my own therapy and my own support systems to help me, particularly as I got older and I had a better understanding of the fact that, of the limits and my boundaries, and, in terms of what I could and couldn't do, what my role was, how to relate to, my mother or my daughter when they were in crisis, all those kinds of things. And understanding just for myself that I needed to do soul care or self-care or whatever for, to make sure that I was okay in order to help my family members. I think it, was a sort of saving grace in that, I had places to talk about my situation. Now, but there aren't any, like, if you don't have that, it's not part of if you don't have a network of people, there's not a network of people available right now. It's beginning because of impacted family and friends and AAS and all that. But back then there was no, I mean, like, if you're struggling with certain issues, if you're struggling with an eating disorder, or you're struggling with your own mental health, there's lots of places to go. There are groups, there's, you know, online resources. There's, you know, books. There's places where you can get some, you know, some advice, you know, or at least get a sense that you're not alone. And that was not true as an impacted family member. It was very individual and personalized, if you know what I mean. There was nothing in the system, mental health system, and I've been in the mental health system for a long time. I'm a person, not only am I an impacted family member, but I'm a person with lived experience and an attempt survivor. So given those things, but there was no place to go to meet other people like myself, right? It was always like my friends, some of them had, you know, families where there was a person who had mental illness in the family, but most of them did not. So it was more like, you know, talking to someone who doesn't quite get your experience, but who's a good friend and is listening. So, I mean, I think there are gaps certainly in the system in terms of there's no, you know, no one's saying, you know, well, join impacted family and friends group on this website, you know, because it's not there as much. I mean, it wasn't there when I was growing up, and certainly, and now we have, you know, the work that you're doing with the voice at the table to be able to really address some of those, you know, things and have groups and things like that. But that's brand new. I mean, it's not something that I had access to, certainly growing up, and not even, you know, 10 years ago. The conference was really amazing for me. And it was also challenging in certain ways. So the things that were amazing is meeting other impacted family and friends. And your resource table was not just a resource table. It was a gathering place. You know, I think of the pubs in Ireland. It's like a resource table as pub in Ireland, you know, kind of thing. Because it's like people gathered there, impacted family and friends gathered there, and to be able to touch base and to talk about what we were learning in the sessions. Um, I I went to a number of sessions on diversity because I am, you know, diversity trainer and very interested in issues of racial equity and social justice. And some of them were very interesting. You know, I went to one on narrative, which was also very interesting. So, I mean, there was a lot of really good sessions that I went to. I've done enough conferences to know that one needs to be selective too, and, you know, really focus in on the things that might spark your, you know, one's interest going forward. Now, you know, the ways that it was challenging was that there weren't a lot of people of color there. And that's a challenge because, you know, it means that our voices are not represented very well at AAS right now. So, and I know AAS is working on that, which is great because I'm helping them work on that. But I also felt at that conference that it was, you know, that what I was seeing in terms of, you know, keynotes and that kind of thing, you know, wasn't resonating as well with me as, you know, the more recent conference. But I felt very blessed to be there and to be part of the conversation about impacted family and friends, as well as part of the conversation more broadly about, you know, diversity and equity and those kinds of issues. So it was an important conference for me because it made me see what other people were doing across the country in many areas. I sort of am in Massachusetts, and we do a lot in Massachusetts, and it's great, but it's not, you know, it's interesting to see what other places are doing, and also how, you know, how Massachusetts can be a leader in certain ways. I think we have been a leader in issues of equity, and but it's also very interesting to meet other people from other places and other perspectives. First, that impacted family and friends are seen for what we are, because, you know, we have our own issues, our own concerns, and they directly relate to suicide prevention. You know, and both because as impacted family and friends, sometimes we have our own concerns, and certainly the stress of being a caregiver can be extreme, and the fear of losing our loved ones can be extreme. And so we need to be able to have places to get support. We also need to have a place at the AAS table in terms of, I mean, we have a division now, which I think is fabulous, but I still think, you know, as a group and as a movement, a lot of people don't know about us. You know, they still don't know, well, what has impacted family and friends? You know, so I think in the field of suicidology, I would love to see us, you know, be part of what's considered in all areas. So, I mean, when you start talking about, you know, issues of, even in specific groups, like when you start talking about issues of equity and diversity, I would love to see people immediately say, well, how, you know, what services do we have for people who are struggling, but also what services do we have in culturally appropriate and culturally relevant services do we have for impacted family and friends? Because, and family systems look different in different cultures too. And so, and the importance of family and how that works, and, and the expectations can look different. So I would love to have impacted family and friends be just, sort of common parlance in our field anyway. And certainly it would be great if it was broader than that, because so many people are impacted. It's not just a small group. I mean, if you look at how many people struggle with suicide and suicidal ideation and all that, and then you take all the family members and all the people that are worried about them, it's huge. And so I would love to get people to understand that and realize that it's okay to have needs as you care for someone, and it's okay to take care of those. And if you take care of them, you're going to be a better caregiver anyway. So I think, my vision is really about, having impacted family and friends be a concept and an identity that is not unheard. It's like we need to be heard, we need to be visible, we need to show that these are the concerns, this is what we need. And we are part of this larger conversation about suicide prevention and how to reduce suicide in many communities. So I feel like what you're doing and what AAS is doing in terms of getting the word out that this is a group, and this is a group of people that's huge. And, we need to consider the needs of this group in order to be better at our jobs in suicide prevention. Well, it's not one moment. It's multiple moments. But one thing that I really feel is that when there was a time that I remember with my mom when I was an adult. Actually, there were times when I was a kid that I would just go along and do stuff and then get overwhelmed. I remember one moment where, my mother had gotten so severe, and what would happen is she was not very good at monitoring her own illness. So she would get really bad, and then she'd get really bad, and then the church would step in, and the church ladies would come and they would take her to the hospital. And I remember one time my sister and I were standing there, and one of the ladies said, you're so stoic. And later on I thought, no, we were so dissociated. I mean, that it was just, and that's a moment where I was definitely in over my head, but I wouldn't have been able to articulate it quite in the way that I can now. And then there was another time with my mom that where I was an adult and she was living in an apartment near me, and the neighbors called me because she was being very disruptive. And I, tried to calm her down and went over there, and, she wouldn't stop being, very loud and knocking things around and all this kind of stuff. And so I finally told the neighbors if they, were disturbed, they needed to call the police, which was, a moment where I thought, it was really hard because I didn't have any choice. And, you know, they needed to not have my mom making a ruckus because they had also had a small child. And, but it was really hard because I knew that, in calling the police, was not going to be very helpful for my mom in a lot of ways, but there was no choice there. And I mean, I think one of the most powerful things that happened was when I was in therapy, and I would describe to my therapist what I did as a child. And I was just describing it. There was no like, isn't this horrible kind of, or isn't this sad or whatever. It was just a description. And my therapist reflected back to me, well, what if your daughter had to do these things when, she was 10? And I was like, no, she's a kid. And then it made me realize that, yeah, I was a kid too. And that this, that I was asking, that things were being asked of me that weren't appropriate for being a child, that I was a parentified child, and that it was not, and it was not what I should have been doing. And even if I were to help with those processes, it was clear that I needed help too. And as an adult taking care of my daughter, I don't think there's been a time when I thought, oh my God, I'm in over my head exactly. It's more like, oh my, just that feeling of wanting to be able to do more, but knowing that I have boundaries for myself, but I also have boundaries in relation to her, and that there's only so much I can do since she's an adult. So, and there's only so much anyone can do, even if the person who's struggling is not an adult. So it's, we have our limits in terms of what we can do. Funny you ask that question, because I had, I mean, suicide prevention, I mean, certainly growing up, it wasn't like that was on my mind, right? We were in the mental health system. And I do remember feeling the one time there was a social worker, and I mean, there's so little too late, right? I mean, I remember when I was about 16 years old, there was a social worker at the hospital who wanted to do art therapy with me and my sister. And what I thought was, I mean, it felt ridiculous to me for whatever reason, and in part because no one has ever tried to help, and that didn't seem like a very good help anyway. But I had a plan. It never happened, but I had a plan that I was going to do collage, and take mothers and cut their heads off just to mess with her. That was my outrage. I was angry. I was like, you're not going to just put a little Band-Aid on it by doing a little art therapy with us. Please don't go there. And, I think as there's different like levels of outrage. I mean, I am outraged at the fact that the mental health system is so narrow that it only focuses on the individual and not on the system. And unless, I mean, some modalities do focus more on the systems, like family systems therapy, but it's not the norm, I don't think, in psychotherapy and in the mental health field. And I also feel like, if you're not looking at the system, not only are you, not helping the people in the system, you're not helping that individual fully either. And to understand that system, you not only have to know who's in it and who's taking care, you also have to know things like what is the cultural perspective of the family and of the person, and the impacted family members. Like what is being dealt with. And you have to look at the social determinants of health. You have to look at, and I'm sort of outraged at the narrowness of how we go about our business in terms of suicide prevention, mental health concerns, et cetera. So I feel like we need to be able to name these issues. And as a field, we need to respond. And I think we're not doing a good enough job reaching impacted family and friends. And that is a tragedy, because it impacts not only the person, the impacted family member, but also the person who's struggling, because we can't help them as well if we are struggling too. So I think that's the ways that we need to go forward. Um, well, really to be full human beings, and then be able to take care of the people that were our loved ones. And I also feel like um, impacted family and friends, are such a huge group. I mean, in terms of the amount of people. I mean, if you look at the number of suicides, and then you multiply times, how many impacted family and friends for each suicide, you get a huge number. And I think to be able to put resources toward that group in particular, that we can't be sidelined. The research should not be done. Oh, well, we'll look at family as the secondary or tertiary question, right? No, we need to have research agendas that look at impacted family and friends, and understand how, what are the issues, how to create supports for those issues that we have that are unique to us, how we can best be part of a larger perspective and a larger team. I mean, because for every person that's struggling, I think that the best way, I mean, that person needs connections, and a lot of times, it gets very siloed. So even the person who's struggling, maybe has one family member that's really taking care of them. And like you say, the burden is on that person's shoulder. And maybe they have a therapist, but the therapist isn't even, or, they're in a group or whatever, but those services are not communicating with that impacted family member. So it's not anything near a cohesive experience for the person who's struggling. And B, the impacted family members out there all by themselves in a silo, thinking, okay, I'm trying to do these things. Maybe they don't have the skills even that they need. So they need resources and skills too. And so, but we don't even know what people need, because we haven't asked, and we haven't researched, and we haven't figured it out. And then, I mean, because if we don't even know what they need, how can we provide resources that are appropriate to support people? So, I mean, we need to start at the beginning here, because, I mean, people don't even know we exist. So, all right, first thing is we exist, and this is how many of us there are. And these are our voices, and this is our concerns. And then, well, as a field, suicidology, needs to say, okay, well, this is an important group if we're going to reduce suicide. And so how do we understand how to support this group, and how we can, sort of harness that energy also to create better responses for the person who's struggling too. So, I mean, I think, I think the visibility piece is really important. I also think the fact that, nothing has been done in terms of very little. I don't know of research that's been done on impacted family and friends. And I also think that, we need to do research, we need to create funds, and we need to name that these funds are for impacted family and friends. And this is why, because otherwise, even if we're included in, say, some kind of research project, it might be auxiliary to the main question. We have to be at the center of the question.